Schism and Merge, a brief history of Xagick. In a world of sheer becoming, being itself becomes a history. This is a history of Xagick, coupled to the Teratogenic Mystique course from Parallax. Xagick is the word magic or magic with an X instead of an M. X is the unknown particular variable. It marks the spot, but it marks it as a mystery. And to become better inhabitants of the magical landscape, we must amplify the role of unintelligible salience and enter more deeply and more intelligently into the semi-consciousness that straddles the known and the unknown. This is the liminal threshold and the high-leverage mindset from which we might be able to make changes to our world space or to ourselves. From nowhere to now, where does the history of Xagick start? The quarks and the sharks and the fungi and the gods of the previous cosmic cycles are too far back. Let us begin with the tool-using animals. The seed of a Xagiccal soul resides within these creatures. They are doubled internally. Not just members of their species, they have a bodily self-image, a living internal hieroglyph in their particular organism situated in its particular environment. Thus they can see into other worlds. We say they pass the mirror test, but what we mean is that they recognize something about themselves in the portal of a pseudo-world. They see their potential agency in the semantic illusion of a reflective scrying glass, and they create magical tools for themselves. Their feelings guide them to make the impossible manifest through unexpected manipulations of stone, stick, and gravity. They now eat the ants and honey that before they could not eat. With these powers, they begin to repattern the future of their species, and their descendants will use these same tools to bring more of the possible into the actual and continue to reshape the dynamics of their environment. We see in these species the occluded half-signs of memories and grave sites and the evocative fragments of something like speech. They have found a portal into a trans-biological world, and we see it when we behold a strange ember of longing and recognition that burns dimly in their haunting eyes. Magical intelligence has begun among the animals. Xagick is stirring in the biosphere, which is now pregnant with the noosphere. From among these high sentient species comes forth the fire-makers, the psychedelic apes, the animals who wear the skin of other animals and unfold shapes from within the stone, binders who know the knotted secrets of affixing rock to wood, animals whose songs become names and become the names of names, inventors of place, servants of time who mark and recount the cycles. For 100,000 years or more, these super-animals make things where no things were before. They place the skull upon the altar and visit the sites of the dead to imagine where else their magical selves might go. They eat the mystic plants and paint supersaturated symbols onto a landscape that stirs in all its corners with phantasmagoria and hypnagogic reveries of beasts, half-beasts, dead people, and forgotten beings hard to name. Slowly they accumulate new powers. Slowly they begin to innovate more quickly, to gain efficacy in bringing the possible into actuality. Slowly they begin to organize around recurrent emergent neurotypes and differentiated capacities within the camping clans. Slowly it becomes obvious that just as there are masculine and feminine and intersexual bodies, just as there are faster and slower bodies, lighter and darker bodies, there are also bodies who peer more deeply into the dream world, who can abnormally care about the structure of ritual, who treat the symbolic landscape as if it were real, and who dare more into the psychedelic and the paranoid, who hesitate longer at the crossroads and wander further from the trails and campsites. Those who taste and nibble and smell more of the plants, those who speak to the animals in odd ways, who are reluctant to speak of many things, who hint they have been pulled into the sky or climbed invisible trees to converse with impossible beings, or who have been overcome by ecstasies that dwarf the clan's ordinary victories and pleasures. Friends of the strange, mockers of customs and creators of customs, inventors of inner practices who appear obsessed by feelings of energy and habits of attention. Thus the social consciousness of the shamanic caste becomes normalized, and the clans acquire advocates and specialists of Xagick, who, if they survive their own youthful instability, hypersensitivity, and foolishness, mature to rival the chiefs and matriarchs, perhaps even to rival the mountains and the stars. By the late Paleolithic and early pre-pottery Neolithic period, these people are playing an important role between the tribes. It matters to everyone, of course, to survive skirmishes between rival or alien clans. It matters to everyone to be relieved of the anxiety of difference and to be enriched and fed by thriving trade routes. To establish connections between these quasi-nomadic proto-nations is a task that draws upon those who are high in openness. It draws upon those who venture further from home and haunt the outskirts. It draws upon those who are most comfortable in attempting to decode alien communications from strange minds. And these types of people find each other across the tribes, between cultures, for they have much in common and always thirst to hear more about other ways of magic. They teach each other the shared intention to grow a sacred culture unlike anything the world has yet seen. A magical culture of thriving people and vast temples and strange new powers that stretch endlessly into the future and the past. Intentions that span millennia and transform the cycles of nature and humanity. Spells of enormous scale. People whose depth and capacity and genius can hardly be imagined. The primal manifestors of culture itself. Stretched over thousands of years is a period of massive invention and innovations whose scale is difficult to appreciate. Everything is new and soaked in excessive meaningfulness. Everything that today we know as history was among these people brought into being from non-being. Just as the atomic bomb was brought into the world, it was no less a thing to bring cities and pottery and writing and agriculture and plumbing and mathematics and calendars and ships and maps and temples into the world. To speak the word that sets a dozen generations to build new stone mountains upon the power spots and to fill them with secret chambers, to align them to the stars and encode within them all the knowledge of the world and the transformations of the self, transformations into something more than or very human. Dim legends of Atlantis and its imaginative echoes across the early writings of the first urban settlements point to a vestigial sense of a great period of prehistoric magic cooperation at unprecedented scales. Intertribal shamanic networks and lineages arise, barring a few ecological catastrophes, and they establish a more purposeful, self-aware, and formidable esoteric culture that coordinates shamanic subtypes and takes three great tasks upon themselves. Firstly, to gather and train tribal sensitives into meta-tribal visionaries of high competency and intense qualities of being, who can embody Xagick and wisdom and make culture flourish wherever they go. Secondly, to organize clans and villages that are healthy, strong, run by sacred ritual, and who cooperate in the production of large-scale megaliths, engineering projects, ecological improvements, horticultural transformations, animal training, and service to temple and service to future. Thirdly, to journey far and wide to explore other tribes, plant the seeds of a cultivationist civilization, and enfold the magical practices of unknown peoples. The masters of trance work and of visionary glimpses became expert at directing group activities toward the realization of their visions, using rhythm, suggestion, plant medicine, sacred calendars, and seductive communication. We are retroactively imagining here a great age of Xagick in which whole communities live and die embedded within the sacred ultra-salient perception of the world and engaged in vast acts of unprecedented manifestation. Xagick on a grand scale. But with or without great climatic and ecological disruption, people tend to become the victims of their own success. With or without rogue shamans and the traumatic impact of periodic intertribal warfare and disease, the huge new forms of manifestation bring their own insidious side effects. As we invent the shift from stone to pottery, we also mutate from a culture that primarily discovers and brings forth subtle forms. A culture of left and right brain balance in the McGill-Christ sense, to a culture that uses a strategic abstract formula to reproduce endless numbers of the same objects from a neutral medium. The dominance of the logos starts small. And as we shift from oral to written culture, we start to replace our actual magicians and witches with official state functionaries who follow a written formula meant to bureaucratically compel a civic hierarchy of obedient or rebellious powers. Those with the force to wield and invent symbols can also be captured by symbols and compressed into the new flattened social consciousness that progressively replaces the sacred landscape. As we shift from nomadic to settled, we produce an exaggerated version of matriarchal and patriarchal control over the shamanoids and the organic priests. Status replaces function. Domineering warlords and suppressive myth-spinning mothers create highly unstable and incomplete social conditions within the emerging city-states. The Great Schism occurs. In the time of the Schism, shamans and witches can now be divided into three broad categories. First, there are those who ally with the state to manifest new realities that serve the interests of the hereditary criminals who identify themselves with civilization itself. The priests who control populations, the seers who serve the pharaohs, and the backroom rituals from which our dream of a satanic Illuminati cabal of cold and lizard-like magicians descends into the collective unconscious. Then there are those who flee from centers of urban power into the wilderness, or into remote esoteric counter-communities. And also there are those who try to reestablish and regenerate an integrated full-spectrum sacred culture from within civilization. These three trends will characterize the next 6,000 years, with occasional Renaissance periods in which the organic priests establish rituals and virtues for healthy civilized living, invent new stories, train the children of the rulers, and secure hidden temple spaces to perform Xagick for general and personal transformation. Perhaps the rise of the Zoroastrians was one such early period of relative success. However, as recorded civilization accumulates its own history of trauma, violence, pollution, collapse, war, social self-suppression, and collective self-enclosure, the left brain tilt is exaggerated. The logos cults predominate. Emotional wounding, community collapse, and social predators, armed with small amounts of magical knowledge, reshaping the world to serve their own family lineages and their barely human body minds. The more shamanic practitioners of Xagick and the constantly re-arising new generational candidates for shamanic training are replaced within the social religions, suppressed widely, marginalized, demonized, and even hunted down and murdered in periodic waves of mass hysteria. This reaches its apex in the regions of post-monotheistic pseudo-modernity that persecute Xagick as both a satanically monstrous and irrationally monstrous phenomenon. While the mainstream churches concealed dark patterns of ritual abuse, it was the occultists who were slandered as perverts attacking children. While the madness of war and industrial destruction backed by leading academics spread across the earth, the magical thinkers were denounced as unreasonable, hysterical, pathological candidates for medication and institutional confinement. Yet this peak of the schism between social and countercultural Xagick was also the beginning of a series of shifts that I will call the Merge. Starting in the Renaissance, there are a handful of individuals connected by new literacy, book exchanges, letter writing, and international travel, armed around with the return of the pagan aesthetic, who create the Western Hermetic or alchemical revival by combining the subtle hints and teachings of the rogue saints of Kabbalistic Judaism, neo-Egyptianism, Greek mystery cults, Gnostics, traces of tantric data from the East, and the residual Nordic, Germanic, and Celtic rites that survive at the northern frontiers of the Roman Christian empires. An international network of loose groups and individuals trying to piece back together the lost or forgotten magical secrets of all cultures, trying to imagine their common source in the past and reconstruct their possible future collective goal. And when the sudden early modernist craze for revolutionary literate inventor explorers takes place, in tandem with an emerging public book culture, this craze partially merges with these underground attempts to generate the religion that is not a religion through pseudo-rational study of the magical arts and through the collegiate production of experimental ritual underground cultures. Suddenly now, the weird personal habits and secret alchemical gatherings are tolerated among those who are manifesting the new economic system, the new cartography, inventing the new impossible weapons and automated machinery. They are needed, so they are allowed. An increasingly open information culture creates a craze for privately pondering esoteric scholarship and embarking on expeditions to dig up the hidden secrets of ancient civilizations. New instruments of state power, known as the intelligence agencies, find it indispensable to join, utilize, and learn from so-called secret societies who perpetuate limited variations of occult, hermetic, and shamanic practice. If the first phase of the merge is the Renaissance reconstruction that we call the Hermetic tradition, and the second phase is the sudden, uneasy public tolerance of alchemical and esoteric habits among world changers who are needed for the emerging modern Game of Thrones, then the third phase of the merge comes in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, represented by the public proclamation of a magical revival, the new cultural boldness of the sex magic fraternities, previously viewed as too monstrous to acknowledge, and the East-West convergence of yoga with magic. Key figures here are Pascal Beverly Randolph, who brought Rosicrucianism and sacred eros to America, Helena Blavatsky, who created and normalized the Theosophical movement as an international magic and wisdom organization, and the infamous poet, secret agent, and performance artist Aleister Crowley, who radically breached the public esoteric membrane for both good and ill. Crowley professed to have received a revelation from transhuman entities announcing the beginning of a new eon in magical practice, in which the suppressed and martyr-oriented forms of blood sacrifice and group conformity would give way to an individualistic, erotic, cosmic, international, and rationally explicable culture of modernist Xagick. At the same time, the field of psychology had emerged from Sigmund Freud's world-inspiring combination of Nietzsche, sex, neurophysiology, hypnosis, and philosophy. Among his primary students were Carl Jung, whose archetypal approach to psychology brought alchemy, the gods, dream work, and the manipulation of coincidence into respectable public and academic discussion. While Freud's apprentice Wilhelm Reich sought for the psychobiological energy through which the organism empowered its symbols and narratives, and this led him not only to the sexual revolution and the introduction of bodywork therapy, but more radically to a new affirmation of cosmic entities, and, according to his biographer, the semiotic philosopher Robert Corrington, Reich set forth the preconditions for an ecstatic naturalist religious perspective that could bring magic, poetry, health, and science together transculturally on the global stage. Everywhere, the old gap between the socially positive, acceptable religion and conventional changemakers, on the one hand, and the esoteric lineages and their concerns was melting away. Whether or not Crowley was correct, something like a new eon for Xagick was stirring. At the same moment, a kind of economy of sorcery begins, through the creation of what is initially called propaganda, and then PR, and now marketing. This has to be closely examined because it is the greatest state and corporate project of full-time focus on the use of symbol, intention, and organismic energy to repattern reality by repatterning human minds for the sake of private gain or public control. In more poetic words, it is a regime of institutionalized dark magic that attracts many of the most adept and complex members of modern society. Advertising becomes the driver of the most wealthy organizations in history and situates all the succeeding generations within a realm of narrative control, attention capture, and aggressively proactive social influencing and professional meme control. The fourth phase of the merge is psychedelic. A new wave of practicing magicians committed to neurological and artistic metaphors emerges around the mass reintroduction of sacred plant medicine and its laboratory analogs. Notably, the occultists William Burroughs and Timothy Leary use occult psychedelic proliferation to open a direct portal between Western underground thinkers, New Science, indigenous shamanic revivalists, and the artistic avant-garde, which soon includes many people from the emerging world of computer programming who see obvious parallels between spells, rituals, and digital algorithms. The mid-20th century gives birth to what might be called postmodern Xagick, with highlights such as Austin Osman Spare, the new sigil magic, interfaces with pop culture, chaos magic, Genesis P. Orage, widespread access to endlessly proliferating New Age and classic volumes of esoteric secrets, everything exposed, juxtaposed, inverted, and transfigured. Now, this course, today on the Teratogenic Mystique, is part of what we could call the fifth phase of the merge. It occurs at a moment when several factors are converging. One is widespread public integration of psychedelics. Another is the emergent awareness of a meta-crisis or great and urgent call for a revival of all forms of multidimensional and right-brain capacity to face together the accumulating result of left-brain dominance and game A strategies. All options back on the table. Another is the sudden appearance of the AI quasi-sentiences, which invoke a world of constant subtle manipulation, reprogramming, unreliable reality, shamanic weirdness, use of the voice to hack reality, direct machine-brain interfaces, and other distinctly sorcerous elements. Yet another facet of the current moment is the constant revelation by the physical sciences of a multi-dimensional, fractal, energetic, informational, paradigm-bound, and vastly open cosmos. Meanwhile, the post-postmodern critique of the postmodern is collaborating with integrative big history and big picture philosophies of evolutionary emergence. Archaeology is restoring the shamanic cultures of the pre-pottery Neolithic back into our maps. Non-human entities are in the news, acknowledged by government and military powers, and cognitive science is calling for a participatory, polyepistemic, and translinear mode of imaginal and ritual engagement with the meaning-making capacity of human brains and human societies. Well-intentioned and well-informed agents and communities devoted to developmental, transformational, and regenerative world changes are arising, but they are only as viable as their ability to tap the power of the unconscious and operate in the world as participatory deciders and manifestors of reality. We stand already and collectively inside the gates of a new age of Xagick, in which we will either slide into a Gnostic derealization of truth, such that depression, madness, and predatory reality controllers abound, Or we move to re-establish within our technological capacity the shamanic, embodied, embedded, and ecological, shadow-embracing, pluralistic, and distributed transjective magical world-making culture such as existed prior to the Schism. The merge will either be socially captured, or it will regenerate the world. If it is to be the latter, we must empower each other. We must call upon all of our ordinary and extraordinary allies. We must lean into that which seems monstrous within and without our own psyches, at the boundaries of our sense-making, and we must use intention, attention, energy, gestures, semantic supersaturation, subconscious intelligence, collective intelligence, strange entities, egregores, and the courage to enter the world of unpredictable, super-meaningful coincidence. We must grow together, more indigenous, in the realm of Xagick itself.